Welcome to Supporting Students with Communication Challenges who are deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf-blind, a professional development opportunity provided by Hear Hartford. Hear Hartford is the local chapter of the Hearing Loss Association of America. This presentation is designed to support accessibility personnel and professors who work with college and university students who are deaf, deaf-blind, and hard of hearing. This session is brought to you by Hear Hartford and has been financially supported by the American School for the Deaf American Rescue Plan Act grant from the Connecticut Department of Aging and Disability Services as part of their Lost in Translation campaign. Today we will be exploring how you can better support students with hearing loss by helping you understand different aspects of hearing loss, discussing some common classroom needs and accommodations, sharing strategies professor can use, considering accommodations that may be necessary beyond the classroom, and providing a wealth of resources to take with you and use as needed. But first, we would like to share this introduction to the Lost in Translation campaign from award-winning actress, director, philanthropist, and member of the National Association of the Deaf, Marlee Matlin. In order to best support your students with hearing loss, it is important to understand some basics. There are different types of hearing loss. Conductive hearing loss happens in the outer or middle ear. This type of hearing loss occurs when the sound waves are blocked from reaching the inner ear to then be processed and sent to the brain. It can sometimes be fixed with a procedure as simple as removing excessive earwax, or a more significant medical procedure. People with conductive loss can be aided with hearing aids or other devices. Sensory neural loss happens in the inner ear, when the sound can't travel to the brain to be heard because of damage to the nerves or hair cells in the ear. Sensory neural hearing loss is permanent and can be caused by a number of different factors, such as aging, exposure to loud noises, genetics, or certain medical conditions. Hearing aids or other devices can also help individuals with sensory neural hearing loss. Some students may also have a mix of both conductive and sensory neural losses. There are also different degrees of hearing loss. These range from mild to moderate to severe to profound. Let's look at an audiogram to get a sense of what these degrees of loss look like. The yellow section is where conversational speech occurs. People with normal hearing can hear everything on the chart, including rustling leaves, birds chirping, and water dripping. People lose their ability to hear everything above the decibel line that coincides with their degree of loss. When you look at where mild hearing loss starts, people lose their ability to hear sounds above the 30 decibel line. This degree of loss makes it difficult to hear certain high-pitched sounds like F, S, P, and K. Mild hearing loss impacts conversations and comprehension if the person cannot view the speaker or when an individual is speaking softly. In this instance, the further the listener is from the speaker, the more difficult it is to understand what is being said. At the 50 decibel mark, moderate hearing loss can make a person lose almost all speech sounds. Conversations sound muffled, and speech that is soft or at a distance may be unintelligible to the listener. The band at the 60 decibel mark indicates that conversational speech is no longer something a person with moderate, severe, or profound hearing loss can hear. A mild through severe loss can sometimes be helped with hearing aids. However, any student with a mild, moderate, severe, or profound loss will have difficulty accessing their education. With a conductive loss, making sound louder can sometimes make it easier to understand, but it doesn't always replace the sounds that are missed. With a sensory neural loss, there are sounds that students can't hear with clarity, even if the sounds are loud, the student is wearing hearing aids, or they have a cochlear implant. Hearing aids, cochlear implants, or bone conduction devices can help, but background noise and distance also impact ability to access speech. In short, all hearing loss, whether mild or profound, is significant, especially in the context of access to education. Even for those individuals with a mild hearing loss, audiologists will almost always recommend hearing aids so students don't miss meaningful information. It is important to note that using technology to support hearing loss does not give a student perfect hearing or full access. Let's listen to this hearing loss simulator.
Hi, Hadley. How's it going?
Good, Grandpa.
What'd you do in school today?
Well, one main thing was that media got canceled, so our class got to either write or draw something.
And what did you write or draw?
Well, I wrote something, and I call it the random fact of the day. Would you like to hear it?
I'd love to.
Random fact of the day. Did you know?
Notice how your ability to hear and understand speech gets more difficult as the degree of hearing loss gets more significant. What we hope you are beginning to understand at this point is that students with hearing loss have a difficult time hearing and understanding language. Whether that student has a mild loss, a severe loss, or is deaf or deafblind, or whether they use hearing aids, microphones, or other devices, they will need help accessing the content of lessons. Let's take a look at what access might look like in the classroom without accommodations. If you are a person with a mild to a moderate hearing loss, you lose a lot of the high-pitched letter sounds, like F, S, P, T, K, and the voice TH. Take a moment to examine this science lecture without those sounds. What you are reading is what a student with a mild to moderate loss hears. Can you identify the topic of the lecture? Can you explain what you learned? Probably not. This is typical of every class experience for students with hearing loss. Look at this side-by-side comparison of the lecture. The professor was discussing photosynthesis, but the student with hearing loss was missing many pieces of the language. Sometimes, even with all the supports a student might have, individual hearing aids, cochlear implants, a sign language interpreter, assistive listening systems like the DM system or the hearing loops, there are still many sounds they cannot hear, and so there are many pieces of every lesson that these students will miss. They cannot easily access their education the way a hearing student would. However, there are many strategies that these students use to help themselves. They are often experts at using context clues and visual cues. Slide presentations are helpful in filling in some of the sounds missed, like the photosynthesis lecture. Notes and pictures are also helpful. Some students are well versed in lip reading and can put some of those sounds together by watching the professor speak. Others will use a DM system or a sign language interpreter. Because students with hearing loss differ in terms of the degree of loss and mode of communication, their accommodation needs will vary. So what's the problem? Even though these different strategies are helpful, they don't provide full access. Students are still missing pieces. Context clues don't always make sense, lip reading is often inaccurate, and sign language interpreters sometimes miss pieces of information. Babar, a college student who is deaf and who uses sign language interpreters, explains a typical problem.
Going to CCSU is quite different than having been at the American School for the Deaf. And I find that most often interpretation is offered through Zoom. I much prefer those who are able to be on campus because going through technology means that there are technology problems. When someone's in the room, there's no glitching, there's no delay. So I certainly don't miss anything when that happens. So that's the big reason that I appreciate it. I continue to work with the Disability Services Office and encourage them to continue to seek on-campus interpreting. It's been hard for them to find enough interpreters to make those hours that we need. And so we use Zoom as a backup.
Michaela explains how her professor's lack of understanding surrounding support technology interfered with her completing an exam.
I did have a time where I had to take an exam and I had my microphone on the cable and my professor didn't know what it was, even though I told her I had a microphone, and she got mad and she told me to put it away, and I told her no, like, it's my microphone. She thought I was gonna cheat. I don't know what she thought, but she thought it was a cheating device. But I have told her it's a microphone, and I had students next to me have told her like it's a microphone. She's been having it and did not believe me. So I went to the Disability Act and complained. And the next day she apologized. So I would just speak up, go to the Disability Act or someone.
Let's consider specific difficulties that students face. Students with hearing loss are not always able to fill in all the missing pieces. They know that they are missing instruction, but they have no idea what they missed or when they missed it. This makes it impossible for them to formulate questions to ask the professor. They simply don't know what they don't know. Let's consider a math class. Hearing students can look at the equation on the board and listen as the professor explains it. When a hearing student copies the equation into their notebook, they can still follow the professor's explanation. A student with hearing loss has a different experience. They need to focus on the professor's mouth or their sign language interpreter to fill in the missing sounds. But when they look at the calculations on the board, they are no longer hearing the instruction. They need to choose to look at the professor or interpreter to hear or look at the calculations. They cannot do both at the same time. And if they try to write in their notebook, they no longer hear the lecture or see the calculations on the board. When they look up, not only do they need to find the professor or interpreter and start listening again, they have to try to fill in those 10 to 15 seconds or more of instruction they missed. Knowing that students may miss instruction is important, but it is also crucial to understand that it takes students more time to hear instruction. They have to process the sounds they hear and the sounds they miss. First, they listen. Then they need to fill in more sound by lip reading. But if the professor has an accent or facial hair, lip reading is a struggle. They also connect context clues, visual slides, and facial expressions to piece together each sound. It takes much more time to do all of those things and process sound in this way. Many hard of hearing students can't detect the direction of sound. If the professor calls on someone who wants to ask a question, it's going to take the hard of hearing student time to locate that person. By the time they find out who that is, by turning around and searching for the speaker, that classmate is done asking their question. They look back to the professor and might hear the answer, but now they have to try to fill in the question and the answer while the professor is speaking. It becomes very difficult to hear other classmates making comments, contributing ideas, or asking questions. This, in turn, can often make students feel isolated. They might miss funny comments the professor makes, and they're sometimes unable to follow the stories. In a group setting, a lot of people start talking over one another, and that makes it extremely difficult for hearing aid or implant wearers and people who sign to follow the story. Sometimes this makes people think that hard of hearing or deaf people are rude because they may not hear their name being called and they don't respond, or they're not laughing at a joke when everyone else is. This isolates hard of hearing and deaf students a little bit more, and it makes it difficult to develop peer relationships, which often leads to frustration. When students struggle to access language in the classroom, they know they're missing material. Their notes are incomplete. They may be continually asking, "What?" or asking for things to be repeated. That can be embarrassing for the hard of hearing student and frustrating for everyone else. By the end of class, or even halfway through, students with hearing loss are exhausted. They are working harder to hear, so they don't have as many cognitive resources available for anything else. It's like driving home in a torrential downpour or in a blizzard. You're gripping the wheel, you may turn the radio down, you're concentrating very hard on the road. All of your cognitive function is focused on trying to get home safely. You may notice that when you get home and park in your driveway, you're exhausted. You are using so much energy to concentrate and do this one thing. For students with hearing loss, scheduling classes with longer times in between and providing listening breaks during class is important for success. In this clip, Layla explains how she struggled with listening fatigue.
So now picture this. It's August 2019. I was in my first semester of college. I was living with 2 roommates I barely knew. I had chosen to go random, taking 4 classes, joining a few clubs on campus, and looking for an on-campus job. My classes were going well, and my accommodations were sufficient. Despite the smooth transition, I felt an overwhelming sense of anxiety. At the end of the day, I felt exhausted. It got to the point where I would call my friends and family at home and they could tell something was up. So, like the answer to any question in college, I Googled it. That sent me right down a rabbit hole, and I found auditory listening fatigue, 3 words I had never seen before. The American Academy of Audiology article that I found explained that a person with normal hearing does not typically experience listening fatigue. The auditory system functions as it should, and the brain processes information easily. But when hearing loss is present, the brain has to compensate for the loss and work harder to process the same information, causing stress on the brain and finally fatigue. I was surprised that at 18 years old, this was my first time hearing about listening fatigue, and I wondered, why is this happening now? My symptoms matched, and looking into solutions, such as reducing background noise and taking listening breaks, the dots started to connect for me. In college, my daily routine was full of constant noise. Mornings, I would wake up listening for the alarm so that my roommates wouldn't get mad that it kept buzzing. Then I would go to class, and from class, I would head to work, and then to lunch with friends, to another class, and then at night, I would go to the gym, or I would have hockey practice. And if I went to my room with 2 roommates, there was always someone or something going on in there, and even the library was noisy with groups studying. I felt like I had to be constantly on to ensure I wasn't missing anything. Putting a name to what I was experiencing was a big first step. I didn't feel like I was going crazy anymore. I then met with my audiologist to discuss my theory. She confirmed it. And from there, I went back to the accommodations office, and my counselor, who I had a relationship with, was luckily helpful in navigating the process of identifying what additional accommodations the college could offer me to combat the auditory fatigue. This time, looking more holistically at how my hearing loss impacted my life at college, discussions of housing accommodations came up and were approved. You might know, February 2020, having this conversation was a little pointless, as my housing issue rectified itself in quarantining in my childhood bedroom with my parents at home. However, it was a useful discussion with the accommodations office that set me up for subsequent 3 years of success. I was able to move into a building on the quieter side of campus and ended up in a single room, which gave me the space to take off my hearing aids and truly relax at the end of the day.
Similarly, students who are deafblind struggle with visual noise. Individuals who are deafblind may rely on their eyes to aid in comprehension. They are not only working harder to hear, but also to handle the barrage of images, which causes incredible strain on their eyes. This increases the cognitive load. To minimize strain, using a dark background similar to the one we are using in this presentation lessens the glare and makes it easier to discriminate what is presented. This is where you come in. As a partner in your students' education, you can make their educational experience a little easier and considerably more accessible. There are some common classroom needs and accommodations that are very helpful to hard of hearing, deaf, and deafblind students who are trying to access their education. Some of the easiest accommodations to manage are to allow for the hard of hearing, deaf, or deafblind student to choose a seat closest to the professor, or in another area that is the best option for hearing in the classroom. Always return desks, tables, and chairs to the same spot each class to help students who face vision challenges. Reduce noise by putting tennis balls or socks on chair legs, closing the door when teaching, and avoiding seats near heating and air conditioning or other appliances that make noise. Captioned videos are an absolute must, even if it's a quick 2-minute clip. All videos need captions, and for deaf-blind students, it is best to have reverse color captioning, white letters on a black background. Having a trained note taker is also a common need. We discussed before that a hard of hearing or deaf student will be looking at the speaker to hear, and when they look away, they lose the language. Getting the professor's slides before class and having a note taker is extremely helpful. Some students may ask to record class using various apps so they can go back later and review content, and professors should allow this accommodation. A professor who shares their presentation slides, notes, or an outline a day or more before class can greatly improve the student's ability to understand the material. The student can prepare ahead of time so that new concepts and vocabulary are familiar before the professor begins to lecture. Students who are deaf-blind can review the notes using enlarged print or a screen reader. They may want to change the background to a darker color and use light print. If students are required to take a lab for science, all chemicals must be clearly labeled in a larger font. Mark measuring materials in larger print to make it easier to read. Some accommodations you might not think of are also reasonable. Not all hard of hearing and deaf students find the same accommodations helpful. You may have one student who uses CART, which is captioning in real time, usually with a remote captioner via the computer. Another student may prefer a DM system with the professor wearing a microphone, and still another student may need a sign language interpreter present. No matter what mode they find most helpful, all these students are working harder to hear, so they get fatigued. Students who are deaf-blind face the added challenge of struggling to see, which creates additional fatigue. When helping them schedule, build in listening breaks. It's best to have an hour or more between classes. Lily Peak shares her experience with a 3-hour class.
I remember in my second semester, I was taking a night class, and which I held once a week, and it was a large class. My professor was into team building and group work. I knew it's going to be challenging, so my professor said he never had a student with a hearing loss in his class. So I explained to him that group work is going to be challenging for me, especially with the noise levels. I was not sure on how to handle it, so I suggested a few things to him, like to make sure the class lower the voice down so everyone can hear each other in the groups. My professor agreed, but it was hard since my class always seemed to forget the rule when the team gets excited and then they get louder. My professor tried his best to remind the class to lower the voice down, but it was a long class that went out for 3 hours. And it's hard to stay quiet for 3 hours. I decided that when choosing classes that I will not take a class that take a 3 hours class again.
We already spoke about making sure all videos are captioned and their sound is amplified, but a professor also needs to face the student when speaking. Try not to cover your mouth and use a classroom microphone. Light from windows can interfere with vision, so lower the blinds before teaching and never stand with your back to a window. This produces a silhouette effect that blocks all ability to see your face and read lips. When calling on a student to answer a question, it is helpful to point to that student. This provides a visual cue that allows the hard of hearing or deaf student to find that person so they can utilize lip reading. Questions and answers in class are naturally fast, so additional wait time allows students to fill in the words or phrases they missed and process what is asked, so they can participate in a discussion or answer a question. Another great strategy for professors is to repeat or rephrase the questions classmates ask and the answers they give. Quite often, deaf and hard of hearing students miss that language. They either don't hear the question, so the answer doesn't make sense, or they hear the question but don't hear the answer. Either way, they lose out on that crucial information. Rephrasing a question is more typically done in a natural way, such as, "What a great comment from Tom who mentioned XYZ." Teachers should recognize that this simple step can support all learners in a group discussion, not just the student with hearing loss. It is a great idea to check in with the student before or after class. A 30-second conversation can be extremely helpful, especially if there is a change to the syllabus or the date of a quiz. It can also be a good time to make sure the technology is working. Students may have their own strategies that work for them, such as a deafblind student wearing a hat in class to block fluorescent lights. It is important to speak with the student and allow them to articulate their needs. Find time to discuss how you can best meet those needs in class without singling them out. Remember that most college students do not want to stand out or be different, so use office hours or a quick check-in before or after class to ask a student if they have access. No matter who is communicating with the student, the accessibility coordinator, a professor, a dean, etc., the most important piece is to continue to ask the student what they need to be successful. Sometimes an accommodation they thought they needed isn't helpful. Some accommodations may be absolutely necessary in one class, but not needed in another class. And in some situations, their needs may change as the course progresses. The more conversations you have with the student about what is working well and what can be adjusted, the more access they will have to their education. Terrell explains the importance of education for instructors.
For me, the only thing I probably wish for disability office, especially professors, they should be educating themselves, like how you want to approach, how you understand, not only for our deafness and hard of hearing, but also for other disabilities. I feel like they need more education in order to understand how to give us the combination, how to do anything other than, like she said about the microphone, instead of flipping at it and assuming it's the phone, maybe educating them will probably be much more better, just like police are undergoing training just to understand us as well. So I think the education is what really needed for all kind of things.
Accommodations for students who are deaf, hard of hearing, or deafblind go beyond the classroom. Students may need support selecting housing, accessing extracurricular activities and clubs, and socializing. Let's listen to Erin talk about her experiences needing accommodations beyond the classroom.
Another accommodation that was added was housing. For safety purposes, I was to be in a dorm room on the first floor, and I was to have a strobe light with a fire alarm, strobe light for the fire alarm, sorry. And I was to have a roommate. In cases of emergencies, they could make sure I was safe. If I was sleeping or in the shower, they were just another person to make sure I was safe. Another thing about college is the social life. So the dining hall is obviously a very challenging place to hear. So I made sure to self-advocate with my friends by telling them that we should sit in booths on the edge of the dining hall so that I could see all of their faces while we were talking. I also brought my DM system to the dining hall to better hear them.
The following slides provide a review and many resources for you. We hope that this information has provided some insight into the ways hearing and vision loss impacts access for some students. Please review and revisit this information often. When you are aware of accommodations and strategies that provide access for students who are deaf, hard of hearing, or deafblind, you will be able to share those accommodations and strategies with professors to better prepare them to accommodate these students in their classrooms. In November of 2024, Hear Her Hartford held an event, Access, Accommodate, Achieve. 7 presenters who have varying levels of hearing loss and one who is deafblind discussed their experiences in college and the various strategies they used to meet with success. They then met as a panel to answer questions from the audience on accessibility supports in college and university. You have seen some of their comments in this presentation. Hear Hear Hartford worked with the American School for the Deaf on this presentation as a part of their Lost in Translation campaign, supported by a grant from the Connecticut Department of Aging and Disability Services. Thank you so much for your time and your willingness to help provide the best possible education to your students who are deaf, deafblind, or hard of hearing. Please feel free to reach out to Hear Hear Hartford with questions.